All right, we're going to talk about flight instruments and navigational equipment now. Questions for you? No. All right, so there are two basic categories of instruments that we fly. No, really three. But the two basic types of instruments are the pedostatic system and gyroscopic system. The pedostatic system runs on air pressure, and they include the airspeed indicator, the altimeter, and the vertical speed indicator. We take static air pressure or pressure from the side of the aircraft that's not like facing into the wind. And we also take air pressure from the pitot tube, which is ram air, which is facing into the wind. So it takes that really, really high speed air. All three of these use the static port, but only the airspeed indicator uses the pitot tube or the ram air. And so the altimeter works like this. There's the outer case, and we take air from the static port and it goes into the case. We set the altimeter setting using this knob and tell the altimeter the air pressure at sea level is this, and it changes adjusts the size of this little chamber here, and it will expand or contract based on the air pressure coming in from the static port. And so this differential of air pressure will drive these gears and will tell you what your altitude is. And it's read kind of like a clock. You've got the 10,000 foot, 1,000 foot, and 100 foot little needles, right? And again, it's all on air pressure. There are some errors. So first of all, you want to make sure that you are setting your altimeter correctly. If you don't, you'll have some problems. And if you're moving from colder air to warmer air, from low to high, clear the sky, you will think you're flying straight and level, but your altimeter will have some error because the change in temperature, and you will actually be way higher than you think you are. And from high to low, look out below. If you're going from high pressure or high temperature to low pressure or temperature, you will be lower than you think you are. You'll be down here, right? So from high to low, look out below. From low to high, clear the sky. Your altimeter will tell you you're hanging out here straight and level, but you'll actually be higher or lower based on the change in temperature or pressure. Now, the vertical speed indicator is very similar to the altimeter. There's the outer case. There's a little aneroid wafer chamber thingy here. But in this case, we actually have a calibrated leak. So the static air goes into the chamber, into this little guy here, and then the air pressure will change, and it'll expand or contract, pulling air in or pushing air out of this little leak, and it'll give you an indication of your change in airspeed. Question?
Outside. So, low to high is clear the sky, right?
Mm-hmm.
The
High to low, look out below.
So, you're still like a lot higher than you are, but you're still like nose level, right?
Yeah, so you will think you're flying straight and level, right? And this is assuming that you can't see outside. If you are flying straight and level and you're moving from a really, really cold area to a really, really warm area, and you haven't changed your altimeter from low to high, clear the sky, you think you're flying straight and level, but what you're actually doing is a very gentle climb up to altitude. And so you're actually up here while your altimeter is telling you you're down here. And the opposite is true from high to low, look out below. From high pressure or high temperature, you think you're flying straight and level, but you're actually in a very gentle descent down to a lower altitude. And if you are unable to see outside because of the weather, you might actually plow into a mountain or terrain or whatever. So you have to be aware of these errors induced by high temperature or extreme temperatures. Yeah, good question. So the vertical speed indicator, like I said, it takes static air from outside the airplane into this little chamber here, and it'll either draw in or push out air from the outer chamber. And if there's a differential of pressure, it will drive these gears and give you an indication of your vertical speed or your change of altitude. And again, it's all air pressure. And then finally, the airspeed indicator. It also takes air from the static port. So it tells you, it gives you information about the air that you're flying through and the super high speed ram air as you're flying through the air. And it'll push against this little chamber and give you an indication of how fast you're flying through the air. Now, there is some air induced by the pitot tube at high angles of attack. If you are, super nose high, this is your wing here. If you're super nose high, it might induce some air. And so we have to adjust for that, and that's the calibrated airspeed. So we read our airspeed off the indicator, and that's the indicated airspeed. Then we have our calibrated airspeed that we correct for that angle of attack. We also correct for air temperature and pressure and our true airspeed. Another question? No? Cool. All right, next is the air data computer. This is for more advanced aircraft with a glass cockpit. It takes information from the pitot tube and uses some solid state systems and a temperature probe to give you a more precise indication of your altitude, vertical speed, and airspeed. And it's just integrated into the display here. I love these, by the way. They're much easier to fly than the old school steam gauges. You've got your airplane here, the yellow triangle, and your wings, the sky, the ground, your angle of bank, your angle of pitch, airspeed, altitude, vertical speed, and your heading, and your navigational information here. Way easier to fly than old school steam gauges. Next, moving on to our gyroscopic instruments. These are, they run on the principles of a gyroscope, which is rigidity in space and precession. So if you spin the gyroscope really, really fast, it'll want to stay in place, or rigidity in space. And then precession, if you exert a force on the spinning rim of a gyroscope, it'll feel that force 90 degrees away in the plane of rotation and give you a yaw. So like if you push up on this little gyroscope here, it'll feel it here at the top rim, and it'll actually give you a yaw or a turn to the left while you're trying to push it down. It's kind of neat. The instruments that work on gyroscopic principles are the attitude indicator, the heading indicator, and the turn coordinator. And they're typically the pitch and roll instruments. The attitude indicator is kind of like this giant PFD here, only a lot smaller. So you've got the sky and the ground. And so you spin a gyroscope really, really fast, and you pitch around that gyroscope. And it'll give you indication of your nose high, nose low, or bank angles. And there are some errors. If you accelerate rapidly, it'll give you a nose up indication. And it might actually tumble if you go beyond its limits. Next is our heading indicator. Gives you indication of your current heading. In the old school instruments, you actually have to set it because it's not tied to a compass at all. It's just a spinning gyroscope. So every 15 minutes or so, you want to reset it. And just like the attitude indicator, it spins and we rotate about it. And then the turn and slip coordinator. This is usually electrically driven gyroscope, while these are vacuum driven. And it gives you indication of your rate of turn and if you are coordinated. So if this ball is in the center, that means you are coordinated and you're flying comfortably. If you are in a bank and this ball escapes, it's really uncomfortable for passengers. It becomes a less efficient turn. And so you just step on the ball with your rudder pedal. And they also have problems with precession and exceeding certain angles. So this right here is the standard rate indication. So it'll tell you that you are flying a 2-minute turn. So if you roll into a bank and you're indicating this little notch here, it means that you will make a full 360-degree turn in 2 minutes. And that's good because then you can time your turns. Let's say you lose your compass, or if you lose your heading indicator or something like that, you can time your turns based on your rate of turn indication here. Next is our AHARS, or our Attitude and Heading Reference System. This is the new way of indicating your heading, pitch, and roll. It's a solid state system that will give you indications of your pitch, roll, and heading. And it's, again, integrated into the PFD. Let's talk about the magnetic compass. This is going to be more relevant to you guys. So the magnetic compass is old school. It's a little piece of metal in floating in a little bit of liquid, and it lines up with the magnetic fields of the planet, and it gives you indication of your heading. There are some errors. First of all, there's magnetic variation. So we display our map on a two-dimensional surface, but it's a sphere. And so what we say is north is not necessarily where magnetic north is actually located on the planet. So we have to correct for that, and that's called magnetic variation. There are isogonic lines on the chart that tell you the angular difference between true north, what we say is north, and magnetic north. And we'll account for that in our flight plan. There's also deviation, anything inside the compass or inside the cockpit that might affect the function of your compass. And then as you're flying, you might have some errors. So if you're flying north or south, you'll have turning errors. And if you're flying east or west, you'll have dip errors. And we use the acronym UNOS and ANDS. If we're flying north and we're making a turn, it'll undershoot. The compass will actually undershoot your turn. And if you're flying south and you make a turn, the compass will overshoot your turn. So there's some error there. And then there's the acceleration error. If you're flying east or west and you accelerate, the compass will indicate a turn to the north. If you decelerate, it'll indicate a turn to the south, even though you're flying straight. And then, of course, there's oscillation error if things are jostling around. Got a question?
So, for whatever reason, if you fly over the magnetic north, will that compass just like spin around?
Yeah, it'll keep pointing to north. So it'll track where north is. I've never flown over the North Pole, so I don't know. We'll have to try it. Let's talk about the VOR. This is the Very High Frequency Omnidirectional Range. It's a navigational system. So there's a station located on the ground, and it sends out these lines or radials, and we can use them to fly to the station, away from the station, or when we have an additional, if we have two of them, we can use it to identify waypoints. Short version is they are essentially radio waves that send out these radials, and we use it for navigation. There's a lot more to it, but they're pretty neat. And we'll talk about them more as we get into the more instrument stuff. There are a couple different classes. There's the low altitude or terminal, low altitude, and high altitude, and they can, they have different ranges. And there's also different flavors of VOR. There's just the regular VOR. There's also VOR DME, which will give you your distance measuring equipment, and the VORTAC, which is, I think, a military, it uses TACAN, which is like a military navigational thing. But the way it works is we tune to the radio frequency for the VOR, like Payne's is 110.6. We verify that it's live, and then we pick a radial we want to fly. Let's say we want to fly to the station on the 310 course. So we'll dial that into our instrument, and then we'll fly on that line. Now, in our instrument, in the cockpit, if we're directly on it, it'll be a vertical line. If we are off course, we're the little airplane in the middle, will be over here. That means that we have to make a left turn to fly to that course. If it's off to the right, it means that we are to the left of the course, and we need to fly to the right to capture the course, and then get back on course and go fly to it. Some things to remember: if we're flying on a VOR, we want to either fly with a to or a from indication. If we want to fly to the station, we want to have it indicating to. And if we want to fly away from the station, we want to have a from indication. If we have the wrong indication, it might reverse sense depending on the type of instrument you've got in the aircraft, and it'll say, like, say we're flying to it with a from indication, it thinks we're doing this, so it'll tell you the opposite of what you need to do. And we'll get into it a little bit more later. So like I said, there's the ground station, there's the receiver, and the actual instrument in the aircraft. It looks kind of like this. Different aircraft will have different VOR indications, but this line here will tell you if you are on that course correctly. It'll tell you if you're going to or from, and how far away you are in degrees from that line that you've dialed in. If you're flying IFR, you need to test the VOR every 30 days to make sure that it is functioning correctly, and there are airborne and ground checkpoints that you can do that. On the ground, it must be accurate to within plus or minus 4 degrees, and airborne, it's plus or minus 6 degrees. Let's talk about distance measuring equipment. So if you've got a VOR and you're like, yeah, all right, I know I'm on the 090 radial or whatever. So you know your position on a line relative to the station, But then if you use your DME, it'll also tell you your distance, your slant range from that station. So now I know I'm on the 090 radial and I'm 10 miles out. I know exactly where I am. So that's distance measuring equipment. We send out a pulse to the station, it sends it back to us, and the instrument inside the aircraft will use the time delay to tell you your distance from that station. Some things to keep in mind, it's slant range, not horizontal range. So if we're looking at a triangle, it's the hypotenuse, not the x-axis. Oh, that's a terrible airplane. Right? It will tell you the slant range. So if you are directly over the station and you're flying really, really high, it'll tell you, yeah, you're a mile away or you're 10 miles away from the station when you're actually right over it and you're just really, really high. So you have to keep in mind, you want to be at least 1,000, or you want to be at least a mile away for every 1,000 feet or so. And it's also line of sight. So if you are flying near mountains and you're trying to pick up that station, it will not work. You have to be able to, the aircraft has to be able to see the station for it to work.